Welcome to This Week in Local, a Localogy podcast featuring lively conversations about the local digital ecosystem, hosted by Localogy analysts Mike Boland and Charles Lachlan.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to This Week in Local. I'm Mike Boland, and my guest today is Christian Ward, who's Chief Data Officer of Yext and frequent keynoter at Localogy conferences and all-around badass. Christian, welcome to the program.
Thanks, Mike. It's great to be here.
We could sort of geek out all day on several topics, but to stay focused, the topic today is AI and search. So we're honored to have you here as a true thought leader at that particular intersection. So let's sort of start there. Now, you were way out ahead of generative AI. I know I tell you this every time I see you. I mean, you were talking about it 2 years ago. And of course, it's a very hot topic now. But beyond just Gen AI, generally, you've been very insightful on how it impacts search. So let's start there. At a high level, sort of walk us through your thesis on sort of the impact of Gen AI, which everyone is sort of familiar with these days, and conversational AI, of course, as sort of a subset of that, and the way that's going to maybe accelerate the evolution of the way that we search for things online, and then the sort of business models that are going to have to adapt or evolve around that.
Yeah, absolutely. So the first thing I would say is, I think I'm not the only one that was really pointing to this technology as transformative. And what's fun about it from my perspective, whether it's generative AI or just AI in general, it's just like Sam Altman wrote in his mission statement years ago, the Moore's law for everything. It can be applied to everything: healthcare, search, sports application. It doesn't matter. It's something that you can use in almost every use case possible. And so when we talk, it's often about search, as you said. And when I think about search, I've been talking for many years about the difference between search and query. And search, the Latin root of the word search is actually cercare. It means to encircle. And that's kind of what searches are, right? When people say like financial advisor, they're just circling a massive amount of content that's available on the web where they're trying to find something in there. But a query actually comes from querere. It's Latin for to seek, to find, to question. And what that is when someone says something like financial advisor in Red Bank, New Jersey, who speaks Mandarin and specializes in family trusts. That's a crazy long, quote unquote, search, but it's not really a search. It's a query. And what's happened over the last 2 decades is we've all kind of learned that you don't type in dogs anymore, right? You type in standard schnauzer black in Maryland, right? You're going after something pretty specific. And so that learning process has been a journey for all people when it comes to search. What generative AI and what AI is doing now is it's continuing us on that journey to dialogue. So if I was going to draw this for you, I would do an arc. I would do a continuum where search was on the left-hand side and way out on the right-hand side is Socratic dialogue. It is actually us having conversations about great interactions. Now, in between there somewhere is query, and in between there somewhere is chat, right? But where this all eventually gets to is my own personal AI, where I'm not really thinking about it in terms of search or query or dialogue. I'm just living my life and having an AI assist me through that life. And for everyone, if you haven't caught it yet, Mark Andreessen just posted Why AI Will Save the World. And I think it's as absolutely transformative as his historic first note about SaaS. But it's one where he really walks through what are the challenges, what are the issues. But when I look at it from the search perspective, I see us just continuing, quite frankly, on the journey, which is going to go from this search concept of what time does Wendy's open? I don't want to have a dialogue on that. That's a search. But in terms of, is Wendy's a great place to work and what's their commitment to the environment? That's a dialogue. That's about the how and the why. And so that's really where I see the sort of the process unfolding.
Now, we'll put that Andreessen article in the show notes so people can read that.
Yes.
Now, it's interesting. As you were talking, one sort of thing that I realized is that among many brilliant things that Google did, it sort of trained and conditioned us all to use its language, right? It's not necessarily natural for us to speak in keywords, but it's gotten us to do that. And I think it's been helped by the fact that so much search happens on mobile devices, which is more conducive to less finger taps and keywords versus long sentences. Now, getting to that sort of more natural way of querying, it's interesting. And then tying this back to generative AI, one thing that was sort of a light bulb moment for me when you were talking about this on stage, probably about a year ago, is that generative AI sort of works by sort of bringing together all of these atomized elements. So that usually happens in the form of like prompts into something like Midjourney or Dolly,
Right.
right? And it builds something on the fly that is often quite amazing. Now, what can search learn from that model of taking these like atomized attributes, particularly local search? You gave some great examples there. Often they are kind of obscure. I'm looking for a bar that has a happy hour and has outdoor dining and serves seafood and is dog friendly.
And
And
hopefully
then,
Guinness on tap. Yeah, exactly.
yeah, right. And traditionally, we have, Google search index, and their page rank and other things that just sort of bubble up preset, preordained listings
Yeah.
based on that query. Can search learn and really transform on the back end to work more like those generative AI prompts where it sort of brings together all those just sort of atomized attributes, for lack of a better way to put it?
Yeah, it's a great question, and actually, I'll answer it sort of continuing the Latin roots, which is the word dialogue is dia and logos, and dia is between, through, or across, and logos is words. And
Hmm.
so this idea is search is staccato, right? It's sort of like I fire something in, I get something back. In
Yep.
game theory, we'd almost call it a sequential game like chess. You move, then I move.
Hmm.
Dialogue's not really like that. It's a continuous game, right? It's something that you constantly are like. The point of all continuous games is to keep playing. It's actually not to win. It's a very different
Yeah.
way of approaching it. And there's a lot of great game theory on this. But when I think about Google or anyone sort of trying to contemplate where this goes or how we as consumers contemplate where it goes, I think the reality is that a lot of people, when they have certain different questions, should actually prompt or cause different search experiences. At Yext, we've been doing this for a very long time. So if you ask for like, hey, what's the closest location? We'll give you a map. If you ask
Mm.
for how do I solve a problem? We'll give you a textual answer like generative AI. When we're doing those things, the type of question is known. Look, I think Google is absolutely amazing and the new SGE is a step in the right direction. But I think they're kind of slow playing it, right? Like,
Mm.
there's no reason for Google to kill the entire search ad model in one fell swoop. Bing doesn't care, right? Bing's off to the races. They don't have an ad model. They don't care.
Yeah,
But
they
yet
don't have a innovator's dilemma like Google does.
they don't. And look, again, I said this on stage, and I stick by it. I love Google, but I've never seen Google angry. None of us have, right? So if you're an
Right.
SEO or any business, and Google's like, I'm not going to cite you anymore. I'm having a conversation, and that conversation is not conducive to a citation. But at the same time, they want to insert the facts into every conversation. So the way I see this, it's kind of interesting, is the listing business of showing up in a map pack and everything. That's always been important. I actually think it's about to skyrocket in importance because
Huh.
what is now about to happen is not just showing up for where the map is. So if they ask a simple query or a simple search, Google comes back and says, well, here's the local business and here's the time they open and here's what they have. But if I start asking more complex questions like difference between the products or difference between two businesses that both offer haircuts, as I ask those, the great way to think about it is the internet is the who, what, where, and when. Okay, it's factual. I'm talking again for businesses and why they
Yep.
should care. It's very factual. But AI and generative AI is really about the how or the why. So when I ask a question, and Google knows the difference, so does Bing. When I ask a question that's how should I get from home to pick up my daughter at lacrosse to getting my son to karate, but he needs a haircut and I want to stop for coffee, those are how, why sort of questions. They're much more complex. But
Hmm.
to answer those questions, I don't believe a single AI platform out there wants to go to Google or go to Bing to run the search. Like, for
Yeah.
example, right today, if you ask Amazon a question through their device and it comes back and it says, well, according to Google, I'm sorry, they
Right.
don't want to do that. They want the answer. So you're going to see this massive resurgence as the number of AIs propagates to have conversations and create personal or niche experiences. they're going to want the same data that we've been collecting and feeding to Google and hundreds of other platforms for years. So this is about to, it's sort of, if I can offer, I think a lot of industries go through this, right? It's sort of the explosion in the 90s of all the late 90s of all the search engines. You had Dogpile, Bing, you had everybody, right? Sorry, I was partial to Dogpile. I thought it was brilliant. But like you go through that all condensed into one star, right? And now we're having the explosion again. You're going to have this massive sort of decentralization of search, because search will happen on device between Apple when they launch their newfound version of this, or my Tesla, or whatever else it may be. So those people are going to want and require the same factual, objective knowledge from every business. That means that part of the business skyrockets, because AI requires, it's not like it requests your company. It requires your company information in order for it to operate. And that's a big opportunity.
So let me ask a sort of devil's advocate question on sort of Google's sort of positioning for all of this. And Google got a lot of grief for being like late to AI, or at least the latest flavors of generative AI. And a lot of people, when they saw Bing come out with Bing Chat and other things, they were, automatically assuming that this is the biggest Google killer. And for all the reasons you're mentioning, it's certainly going to cause a lot of attrition to their business. But when you look at how Google's positioned from a sort of data perspective, they have been indexing the web for the last 25 years or so. If you look at something like Google Images, that's one big training set. They also have a lot of direct research in things like Transformer and Tensor, and of course, user-facing things like Assistant. So where does that positioning lead them? And as you mentioned, they're sort of slow rolling it because they don't want to rush to disintermediate the traditional SERP model, where they have a lot of search inventory and sponsored results and all these things. So it's clear why they're sort of slow rolling at that. At a certain point, which has probably already begun to happen, they realize they have to sort of get on board and integrate AI in lots of sort of clever ways they're now doing. But how do they look in terms of their positioning, their underlying positioning, as opposed to sort of upstarts that don't have all of that, just years and years of training data?
Yeah. So first off, I will offer to everyone: you don't bet against Google. Like they are the most brilliant. They have more scientists work on this than most. And so what I would say is, I'm kind of giving them a hard time of slow rolling it, but it's like, I don't really think it takes 5 seconds for them to generate with Bard the response. Like I feel like that's probably could go faster. But realistically, I think what they're going to do, which is so incredibly bright, is they're not going to kill the model they have, because a lot of searches, like what time does Wendy's open, that doesn't require, I don't want to have a conversation about that with an AI. Like what's going to naturally happen is there's going to be segmentation of searches to dialogue the whole way. And then whether it's an objective question or a subjective question will drive that segmentation as well. In other words, a lot of times when you ask a subjective question, you get like people's like blog posts or TikToks about what they think of something. That's no offense to all the people creators, but it's kind of garbage. Because what I really want is I want Google to use the context of what it knows about me, which is an enormous data asset that they have that so many people don't. Remember, they have my calendar, they have my email, they have where I'm going next week. Like they got a lot. And so they are in a phenomenal position with all the other Google products and services. Now, that may not translate into ad sales the same way, but it might actually translate into offers. So work with me on the words here. Ads show up in a contextual basis based on my search, as well as RankBrain and other things. But an offer at the end of a dialogue is actually quite magical, right? If I have a conversation about the best pet to get for my kids, and this is what I'm looking for, and I have a 2-hour conversation with Google's AI, well, at the end, wouldn't it be magical? And wouldn't you as a breeder pay a ton for the lead at the end of that, because your dog is perfectly matched up with me? So that it starts to change from just ads per this to offers. And then where it goes from there is, I think you end up with a consumption model for most of these AIs that if it's not Google, let's say, but let's say it's one of 1,000 other models that are going to be generated by Tesla and the rest, they might have more of a consumption model, which is the more you use the AI, maybe you pay a little bit of a subscription fee. But I don't think you ever sort of look at Google and say, I don't know if you remember in 2018, remember when they did Duplex,
Oh
where
yeah.
the AI made a hair salon appointment and everybody freaked out. Look,
Yeah.
they've had this tech for a long time. What I think is happening now, to be fair to them and everyone else, they've been pushed into the release, and now they have to sort of figure out how they want to play this out. But again, not to speak too much of Google, I just think they're in a phenomenal position. I think they have all the technology they need, but they have to be careful about what the experience is. And to be fair, also, guys like you and I, we're super into this. We got 98% of the rest of the population that has never
Yeah.
even tried this stuff. So
Right.
I think they're doing it as they should. I think Bing and others will continue to push them. But I think the only risk that I see for them really going forward is if the internal politics around the sales model, the sales machine that is
There you
that
go.
part of the house, I think that's tough because they're going to have to give up some of that in a model where the offer or the dialogue is more appropriate, or quite frankly, just what the consumer expects.
Yeah, there could be some inertia there. So to sort of recap that, that's interesting. There'll be a certain segment of searches that may be cannibalized or disintermediated by more AI-based questions. There's a large segment, as you pointed out, where search is already the best mousetrap, those sort of more rote ones, whereas
Yes.
Wendy's.
Yes.
Now, for the segment that is sort of, for lack of a better term, replaced by sort of a more conversational or AI-based user-facing tool, you bring up a good point that the concept of offers, if we look at that from sort of a unit economics standpoint, those are much higher value leads. So the math for Google
Absolutely.
ends up being, can we replace the overall value of that just one great lead versus the 3 lower margin ads that we were
Yes.
serving before for a similar query?
You got it. Yeah, I think that's
Mm.
so again, I'm surely speculating, but when I think
Oh,
about
this is so high
how
level too, but still fascinating.
well, I think when we think about what the next steps are, right? There will be full segmentation of the conversation, right? So there will
Yeah.
be search, there will be queries, there will be chats, and there will be dialogues. And if I offered all four, there will also be subjective or objective. For many people in the SEO or content strategy world, I would just offer you got to be careful thinking about your subjective stuff. Top 5 reasons to buy this product, right?
Yeah.
Because they're now generative AI. Everybody's going to do the same thing, which is generate 100 million articles about 5 tips for your summer garden. And it's all going to be cannibalizing each other. And Google's just going to read it all. You're almost giving Google the legal out to say, I'm not going to cite any of you. There's a billion
Yeah.
of these
Yeah.
articles, right? So the very thing that we're looking to use to make our lives better is going to be the thing that kills you on the other end. So you've
Yeah.
got to be careful about your strategy here. I do think if you're talking about the models and the segmentation, it really is going to come down to really where I think the next step goes. And there's an amazing Stanford and Google article on this research article. It's where they're going to take memory and attach it to the dialogue. And then you get into this whole other world, which is, and Sal Khan is trying to do this with Khanmigo, the Khan Academy. It's
Yep.
where your child gets a tutor for the rest of their life that knows everything they've ever learned, has a dialogue, can tell you how much the child actually understands each concept. But that AI never gets tired. It never gets impatient. This is a little bit of what Andreessen was talking about. When you look at that, I think that's what you're going to have to help you through life. So yes, it can answer when Wendy's is opening. But if you ask a much more existential or much more deep question, it's going to have to model some other way the revenue around that. I just don't see that happening as an ad-supported model.
Yeah. Very interesting. And a lot of this, it sort of it makes you think of Google's sort of traditional ranking factors and how they achieve relevance, just from like a end
Yeah.
user perspective. They have to continue doing that for people to continue using Google, because that's the first step to all of this. But one of the major ranking factors in achieving relevance, as you know, is authority.
Yes.
And that goes in a few different directions. You mentioned sort of grabbing blog posts or generating a lot of subjectivity. So that could erode some of the credibility and relevance there. However, add in some of the personalization mechanisms you mentioned, and then all of that sort of credibility and authority comes back in, because it is authority on that one person or
Yes.
topic or whatever that thing is.
Yes. Yeah. So I think authority and memory are actually very tied, not in the
Yeah.
concept of the way most of your listeners are thinking about their content strategy. But what I'm saying is Google uses what I have searched before to personalize what my search results are going forward. So when
Yeah.
I type in the word bank, Google knows I don't mean a financial institution. I actually mean a river bank for fly fishing. It's a totally different thing. And so
Yep.
that process is only going to get extended further, which is based on what the questions I'm asking and memory. You start to get into this world where Google can really have, and it's not, again, I keep saying Google, it's any one of these AI platforms that we start to trust with personal information that it holds in memory while it's helping you navigate through content. And so if I'm a business, when we talk about authority, the first and foremost is branded objective facts. The business is the authority. Now, we've lived in a world for a long time, and this has driven me nuts, where you're still buying what are called defensive ad spend on your own brand, right? Where people are trying to show up for your brand, so you end up buying ads through Google. I think that's wrong. I think that's always been wrong, which is Wendy's or IBM or Yext. We should not be spending money when someone literally asked a branded Yext question about our products, goods, and services. I'm like, that really should be ours. And I think to some extent, that part's settled in that you will be the authority on.
Yeah.
It's all the other stuff, the subjective or the instead of sort of the intrinsic data, the extrinsic data that's about you, but you don't own and you didn't create. And so those areas, I think conversational AI and really dialogue are going to have massive implications, meaning almost every customer journey that starts where they don't really know the brand yet, they're just like, what are marathon sneakers, right? That's a objective, unbranded query. That Google's going to write you the answer on that. It's going to explain to you why they're different and what they are. It's going to take 5 more interactions in the dialogue before they go, actually, there's a pair of Nikes size 9 just down the street if you want to get them. They're great. And now that's where I was saying that's like an offer now. It's not an ad. They've walked me all the way through. And I think that opens up phenomenal business opportunities for kind of everyone involved, because the ultimate in personalization is actually dialogue. It is not creepily following me around. It is not using data I didn't know you had about me. It is letting me ask you a question and moving from marketing monologue, shouting through ads and everything else, to marketing dialogue, where the brand or the company through Google or any other AI is having an honest conversation of, what are you looking for? It's kind of funny. I know we think about AI as tech, but I see AI as the ultimate humanization opportunity, meaning when you used to walk into a shoe store and the person would put you on the treadmill and they'd watch your gait and all that stuff, that human interaction is priceless, because you start to believe and have trust that the dialogue you have shared with this person, they're going to get you to the right answer. That's personalization. This other stuff we've been doing for years of following you around and peeking in your garbage, that stuff's going away. It's always been going away, but AI will be the nail in the coffin, because you don't need that stuff if the consumer is willing to ask in a dialogue, or more of a dialogue, what they're looking for.
Mm-hmm. Now, we often think about AI's integration with search in everything we've been discussing, sort of the primary user-facing interface in, how you're asking a question or a query, getting an answer, and just getting to that thing you're looking for. And it occurred to me recently that Google has already started for years, and then it has accelerated lately, to really integrate a lot of AI sort of at the margins. Like the recent announcement at their big marketing event, which I think came out like a week after I/O, that they are now utilizing AI to sort of modify meta descriptions in search results, sort of on the fly based on whatever the query was. That's really sensible. Makes a lot of sense. Also using AI in the back end to help people sort of create and manage their campaigns. You type in the site you want to drive traffic to and a few of your other goals, and they'll work out all the sort of keyword generation and copy and all of that stuff. That also makes sense. So what do you think about all those sort of integrations other than that immediately user-facing sort of aspect?
Yeah. So I'll speak to the specific Google examples, but what you're actually describing is something in academia that they've talked about, I want to say, since 1989. This person for their dissertation wrote something called the technology acceptance model. And it was based upon the theory of planned behavior and the theory of reason actions, things in psychology. And basically what it says is people adopt a technology for two reasons. How much utility does it provide? So how useful is it for them? And then how hard is it for them to use it? What's the cognitive burden? So I could tell you back in the day, hey, you got to get this DVR thing. But for a lot of us, figuring out the damn DVR thing was a real pain. Like it was hard at first to know how to like use it. So people accepted the DVR as it got easier and the cognitive burden went down. So there's these two factors. What you're actually seeing, and what I'm really excited about, is cognitive AI and machine learning, all these things, and conversational AI. They're taking the burden of knowing how to do Google AdWords or setting up your website or setting up your your incorporation by integrating the conversational layer. All interactions, the cognitive burden is going to zero. And I offer Mike, we've never lived in a world like you and I have grown up at a time where being tech savvy was a huge advantage in your career. What I'm saying now is the computers are human savvy. So you don't need to know how to do that anymore. That's the part. So it's not when we say at the edges. I think what everyone is going to run to do, and this is a huge part of what we do at Yext, is we want to make sure that if you don't know how to use Yext, we're using conversational AI to explain everything you need to understand in a dialogue to use the platform so that people move from using 30% of your platform, which is the typical SaaS usage for most software. It's like 30%. We want people using 90%. The reason people don't is they don't understand how. So Google's ad thing, because I saw that announcement and the meta tags, what they're doing is they're saying, hey, I'm going to translate this for you, which is funny because large language models, that was what they were designed for. They're actually translation engines. But now let's say I'm a plumber and I don't know anything technical. I can have a conversation of how to best set up my ad spend and it will walk me through it. I used to have to hire 10 people over 3 years to explain that. So you're getting to this area where the cognitive burden becomes transparent. It's not a thing anymore. And now it's just my decision of how utilitous the product, good, or service is, of whether or not I adopt it. And I think that has ramifications way beyond just what Google's doing.
Yeah. Well, two quick things. One is that has implications for not only the SMB sort of landscape, but sort of agencies, right? I mean, this is a lot of the heavy lifting they were previously doing, in addition to, proprietors that were doing it themselves. And number two, I think you've given me the title for this episode, which is The Computers Are Becoming Human Savvy. I love that. We're almost out of time here, but I want to give you a chance to, and you mentioned sort of where Yext sits in all of this throughout. And some of the sort of historical sort of North Stars, product drivers, and philosophies you hold at Yext. So to end here, let's sort of synthesize this with how you're sort of crafting Yext sort of product roadmap, at least to the extent that you can talk about it here publicly, to sort of align with the direction of the world in all the ways we've just discussed.
Yeah. So what I would say is, and I don't think anything I'll be saying is sort of earth-shattering to anyone. At Yext, we have always believed that the authoritative source of the most important information from businesses should be the business. It shouldn't be aggregated, shouldn't be scraped. It should be the business, and they should control that. And that's because you can't crawl and scrape a lot of stuff. You really do need the business to sort of provide that data. That being said, when you move all of that data into a content platform or a knowledge graph or a structure that can then be used to power things like chat or conversational AI, there's a very close relationship between having all of your knowledge structured perfectly so that AI can be applied to it in a compliant, legally controllable way. And that's some of the stuff I think people don't quite understand just yet, which is large language models are awesome, but hallucinations, the thing where they make stuff up, that's not a bug, that's a feature, right? Like they're doing that on purpose because there's randomization built into it to allow for creativity. A lot of businesses don't have the, let's say, legal or compliance bandwidth to allow for creativity. They
Or
need
tolerance.
or tolerance, yes. And so you're seeing that in a lot of headlines where people are hooking these things up to their own data. I'm like, I'm sorry, you're doing this wrong. So the way we see it is we've launched chat, we've launched generative AI throughout the knowledge graph and throughout the platform. We're building sites now. So we have the full-blown headless CMS that will take your knowledge and build content with it. All of those pieces to the puzzle, they happen because, and this will sound a little funny, but there's a lot of still ditch digging in this, right? You still have to go get the data and store it and structure it. And as much as people want to believe it's just like, oh, you just throw it in, you really do have to do that well. And you have to have the compliance controls. You have to have all the sign off built in. You've got to, all of those things that I will say are somewhat of the unsexy part of managing data for a business or an enterprise at scale. That's tough. And
is that the Yext knowledge graph that you're referring to?
Yes. Yeah. That's honestly, it's not just the graph, it's the whole platform. And that is what we have dedicated. I've now been there, I think I said earlier, a decade. Like we have been focused on that problem of managing the most important knowledge as cleanly as possible. And it just so happens that that's also highly aligned, not just with conversational AI and large language models, but the use of all future AI structures, because the more it's classic garbage in, garbage out control, the more you perfectly feed and store that stuff in one great construct, the more you can control and prove what the AI is actually doing. And that's going to continue to be a huge battleground for the next few years.
Mm-hmm. Well, that's actually a great place to end it. And that's all the time we have. So I want to thank you, Christian, for joining us.
Absolutely. It was a pleasure, as always. Thanks again, Mike.
This was fun. I learned a lot. So thanks, everyone, for listening. This has been This Week in Local. Stay tuned every week for more episodes. You can find the show on all major podcast networks and find out more at localogy.com. Please subscribe, like, and comment. So I'm Mike Boland. My co-host is Charles Laughlin. Our producer is Dara Sweat. So thanks for listening and see you next week.
Thank you for tuning in to this week's episode of Localogy's This Week in Local with Mike Boland and Charles Laughlin. Be sure to subscribe for more.